Papal Posse is up next, but first, Pope Francis is urging the faithful around the world to pray during the month of June for young men and women preparing for marriage. Francis released a video June 1st announcing his prayer intentions for the month, titled The Beauty of Matrimony. Let us pray for young people, he says, who are preparing for marriage with the support of a Christian community. May they grow in love with generosity, faithfulness, and patience. And on this journey of life, the bride and groom are not alone. Jesus accompanies them. Here with in-depth analysis of all of this and much more is the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org and St. John Henry Newman visiting chair at Thomas More College, Robert Royal. And from Manhattan, canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray. Gents, thank you for being here. We wanted to have you back because there was so much we couldn't get to last week. I want to start with some breaking news. Earlier this week, Pope Francis announced the most sweeping changes to canon law in nearly 40 years. The revision of Book 6, which covers penal sanctions in the Church, imposes much stricter rules and penalties dealing with sexual abuse. They also address clerics who commit fraud or attempt illicit actions like attempting to ordain women priests. Father, how significant are these changes themselves?
It's significant, Raymond, because it's bringing into the actual code legislation which the popes had enacted, this pope and his predecessors, over the course of the last 40 years, particularly, for instance, regarding ordination of women, and then different laws regarding sexual abuse committed by clerics. What's important, I think, in the general view and perspective is the reaffirmation that as part of the mission of the Church, she must use coercive penal means in order to protect the common good in the Church and in order to promote the reform and the repentance of those who offend against the law. And one of the big problems that we've had in the Church since the Council is the rejection of any use of penalties or what would be called coercive means in order to try to protect the interests of the flock and to get recalcitrant people to, obey law and to live according to the principles of Catholic morality. So it's a good improvement. I've started to read it and study it. There are a lot of technical things that need to be explored, but the general impression, I'd say, this is a good move, and I think it will highlight to the world that the Catholic Church is not simply out there saying, don't do wrong things. No, the Catholic Church is saying, if you do something wrong, you are going to be punished.
Bob, your thoughts on the timing of this? Apparently, this revision has been in the works, for 14 years. Why would it take so long to tighten up and strengthen these penalties, particularly for clerical sexual abusers?
It may be that there's been so much pressure put on Rome because of the difficulties we've had with clerical abuse and other problems within the Church that they felt that they had to act. I agree with Father entirely. As a layman, I'm not a canon lawyer, and obviously canon lawyers like Father Murray are going to have to go over this with a fine-tooth comb, but it's, to me, very interesting that they even explicitly in the presentation of this revision talked about how there was a mistaken mentality back in the 80s that punishment or using legal means was somehow not part of the gospel, that we ran contrary to the spirit of the gospel. Being soft on crime sort of means that you get more crime, and being soft on abuses like this means in the Church you're going to get more abuse. So I'm glad to see that there's been that recognition explicitly presented as the reform is there. And at the level of principle, this is a good step forward. I just hope that the mechanisms are there to actually put teeth into this, because a legal system without those institutions is toothless. I love a remark of G.K. Chesterton's about this sort of thing. He says, a good legal system is when we can identify that A says B must go to prison and C says when B can get out. We need that kind of specificity, and that's going to have to be implemented in institutions at all sorts of other levels.
Yeah, and we should say, for the audience's sake, this doesn't in any way undercut the role of secular authorities concerning the crimes of clerical sexual abuse, etc. Those still have to be reported. This is the Church's canonical penalty, not in substitute of the secular penalty. I just wanted to make that clear. Some, I think, are confusing the two. There are a couple of other canons I want your reactions to. One reads, Canon 1367. It says, parents and those taking the place of parents who hand over their children to be baptized or brought up in a non-Catholic religion are to be punished with a censure or other just penalty. And then Canon 1379 reads, a person who deliberately administers a sacrament to those who are prohibited from receiving it is to be punished with suspension, to which other penalties mentioned in Canon 1336, etc., may be added. Father, given the controversy about distributing communion to pro-abortion politicians recently, do these revised canons weaponize the sacraments? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I hate that expression, weaponized. You know, that was used about taking, chemical processes and putting them into bombs and then shooting them at your enemy. No, to uphold the canonical order is not to weaponize anything. It's to bring the gospel to bear upon human sinfulness and the desire for an orderly and peaceful society. You know, on the question of baptism, the Church teaches that being baptized a Catholic is a gift from God, and that those Catholics who become parents have to give that gift to their children. They have to have them baptized in the church. That's an obligation. It's not a suggestion. So to have them baptized in another church is a dereliction, and it's not what is intended by God. Now, as regards the administration of sacraments, this specifically has to do with people who have been publicly identified as excommunicated or under a similar penalty. So if you have, for instance, a woman who attempts to become a priest and gets ordained by somebody, she should never be allowed to then receive communion in a Catholic Mass. She should never be allowed to concelebrate, so to speak, at a Catholic Mass. Now, the question is about Canon 915 and politicians who become obstinate public manifest sinners. That's a little more complicated because the verification or to identify somebody as such does require some official act on the part of the minister who is going to distribute communion. Where that's in doubt, then you have to act, with more reflection. That's why it's so important, for instance, regarding our president, that the bishops make a statement here that it's incompatible to be a Catholic leader and to promote or finance abortion. So if that were to be done quite clearly, I think that this canon would then apply.
Yeah, Bob, Father referenced that canon, and I don't exactly know how it's been updated because I didn't compare it to the former, but the canonical penalty against ordaining women to the priesthood, it says that the individual attempting to do that, the bishop presumably, would incur upon himself an instant penalty. Does this end the debate over ordination of women, or is there still wiggle room since Pope Francis convened that study group on women deacons?
Yeah, that disconnect bothers me a little bit because I'm assuming that this revision of Book 6 of Canon Law could not have taken place without the Pope's approval. I don't know if he read through it. I don't know if he's deep enough in canon law to appreciate all the ramifications of what were in there. And obviously these are going to be debated, and we're going to be hearing a lot about this in coming times. But it's not only about that. It seems to me that if you're going to say that by doing something like procuring an abortion, you automatically are excommunicated and then cannot put yourself forward for communion. There are other consequences like this. For example, just last month, or in early May, the Pope organized, has tried to organize some mechanisms for the excommunication of mafia members. Now, a lot of us would think that mafiosi are murderers, they're criminals, and they should be severely reprimanded by the Church for that activity. Well, the Pope has also said that procuring an abortion is like hiring a hitman, like hiring a mafioso. So is his thought process going to be carried through in all those steps so that we can actually say that that legally speaking, that in consonance with this new thing that has been put forward, that the consequences are going to be that detailed, and this could run right up to the President of the United States. I think that this is going to be a big debate. It doesn't end anything. It starts things, but I think it starts them in a better place.
Last week, we discussed reports that indicate Pope Francis may restore heavier restrictions on the traditional Latin Mass, the extraordinary form of the Mass. This week, it's being reported by Diane Montagna in Rome that 2 curial cardinals are backing the Pope in this, Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin and Prefect of the Congregation for Bishops, Cardinal Mark Ouellet, both allegedly confirming that there is a document currently under review. Father, assuming this is legal canonically, the Pope has the ultimate authority here. Why reverse a motu proprio, a popular one at that, where the priests were given the option to celebrate the old form of the Mass or the new?
There is a lot of pressure on the Pope for getting rid of Summorum Pontificum from certain quarters in the episcopate and certain theological circles. They view the restoration of the Tridentine Latin Mass as being a tremendous mistake. I don't agree with that at all. And then we know that the Pope himself, as he's expressed on different occasions, thinks that young people who are attached to traditional ways in the Church are somehow reflective of emotional disorders and don't need to be encouraged in that attachment to tradition. I also disagree with that. Now, as from the point of view of the good order and life of the Church, Pope Benedict made quite clear that the celebration of the Tridentine Latin Mass is just one form of the Roman rite. So it's not really like conceding somebody a privilege to do something that otherwise shouldn't be done. No, it's actually just giving a mechanism for the orderly and free celebration of what's recognized as being valuable. And why wouldn't it be? This is the Mass that was celebrated essentially, from the 9th century and even earlier in the Latin Church. And it certainly was the Mass that accompanied the explosion of missionary fervor, the expansion of the Church in the New World and in Asia and Africa. So the lack of sympathy for the Tridentine Mass really bothers me because it displays a lack of pastoral charity for people who don't particularly agree with the perspective that some of these bishops put forward. I don't think it's not nostalgia to want to worship God with mystery and reverence and historical tradition.
But canonically, can the Pope do this? Can he just wave away a motu proprio of his immediate predecessor?
Yes, the Pope has supreme authority in the Church, and he can forbid this. He doesn't need to, no other authority has to confirm his decisions. The wisdom of the decision is subject to debate, but the fact that he can make the decision legally, that's not subject to debate.
Bob, essentially this would take us back to the days when permission of a local bishop was required for any priest to celebrate this old rite. What effect does driving the old rite underground again have on the faithful who've benefited from Summorum Pontificum, particularly the young people? I see them here in New Orleans, young families by the hundreds coming in and packing in to that Latin Mass.
Yeah, to me, this seems to be an overreaction on the part of certain people in Rome. Clearly, the Latin Mass is not going to entirely replace Masses in the vernacular. These have existed now for quite a while. One of the things I'm very worried about is, I don't think we knew this last week, but the jurisdiction over the Latin Mass used to be within Ecclesia Dei, which was a section of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It's now being moved from there to the Congregation for Divine Worship, where, as we know, the various people who have replaced Cardinal Sarah and others are fairly hostile to this Mass. So this seems to me to be a very strong signal that some people just find this a threat, and to me that threat is, the way they conceive of it, is entirely overblown.
The Vatican has announced that the Synod of Bishops on Synodality, I'm not making that up, is postponed until 2023. And there will be a 2-year consultative preparatory phase involving Catholic dioceses worldwide. There'll be a diocesan phase in October of 2021, where each bishop is asked to consult the local church. Then an ordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops convenes at the Vatican in October of 2023. Father Jerry, this sounds a lot like a synod within a synod to discuss synods. What do you make of this? And how do the layperson, how do they decipher this thing?
Well, a synod of bishops is precisely a meeting of bishops, and I don't see the necessity for a 2-year process. On the other hand, I'm very aware of what they're doing in Germany, which is that the lay people, in union with the bishops, are coming up with a revolutionary program and promoting all kinds of things that are both heretical and immoral. We don't want that to happen in the wider church. Synodality as a way of consulting the laity, the bishops are the one who have the teaching authority in the church, and it's wise to consult lay people, but I don't think it's wise to create a 2-year mechanism where pressure groups are going to arise. They're going to issue all kinds of statements. They're going to demand that the bishops listen to them. I mean, think about the female ordination crowd, the people who will not accept the church's teaching that women are incapable of being ordained priests. They're going to use this as 2 years of beating the drums and saying, look, the Pope wants you to consult us. Well, this is what we're telling you. No, I hope that this process gets managed in a better way than I foresee, having given the German experience some consideration. Pressure groups who want to revolutionize the church are going to use this as a means to cause trouble. That needs to be stopped.
Bob, when I read this, I kept thinking, here we are discussing a process to discuss the process of governing the church. But at the same time, the Holy See is sending directives that they don't want bishops in the United States to discuss reception of communion among themselves. Is there a disconnect here?
Yeah, that's the great irony. Actually, I think what our bishops are proposing is what synodality would be in the best sense, that there's a local group of bishops who are trying to deal with a problem, and they're fully within their rights, and they're not touching the matter of doctrine. They're touching questions of how to implement that and how to make it more effective in a certain national context. Father is exactly right. The opposite is what we see in Germany, where they're off to the races as if synodality means that it's democracy. You can just redefine what you want. They've actually said that they're going to be conflicting and different visions of what Catholicism is. Now, to me, the process is very clunky, too. They talk about doing this at the diocesan level, at the conference level, and then at the continental level. There is a continental sort of bishops' conference in Latin America, but in North America, or Canada, and the United States, and Mexico is technically part of North America. Are we going to join together? I don't know that this has been thought through very well. It sounds like one of those things that you do when you want to give the impression of consulting widely and democratically. But man, it's it leaves a lot of chances to be abused.
Yeah, well, the Pope often said sometimes you have to make a mess. This could be it. Pope Francis recently paid a visit to the Dicastery of Communications at Vatican Radio and the headquarters of the Vatican newspaper, which marked its 160th anniversary. While there, Francis suggested that the office may not be so valuable, saying, quote, "There are a lot of reasons to be worried about the radio, L'Osservatore, but one that touches my heart, how many people listen to the radio? How many people read L'Osservatore Romano?" He went on to say that their work was good, but there was a danger that their work doesn't arrive where it's supposed to. He warned against falling prey to lethal functionality of going through the motions without achieving anything. Now, when I first read this, I thought this could be a worthy critique. I could devote a whole show to church efforts that go through the motions without much effect or much of an audience. But your thoughts, Father Jerry?
Well, the Pope wants to improve the communications apparatus at the Vatican. That's a worthy and good cause. And I'd have to say right now, if you can survey the world of websites, of YouTube, of online streaming, the Vatican is not very present. And I think it's just part of the vision that needs to be implemented. You know, the expression one-stop shopping is how, successful corporations begin to dominate markets. Well, we should have a website in which we can both hear the Pope, read what he says, not wait an hour, not wait 10 days, not wait whatever. Everything should be instantaneous. And the message should be more than simply announcements. They should be basically finding out how to promote the faith, and how's that going on in the world. A lot of things could be utilized. Some dioceses have much better websites than the Vatican's website. So there are ways to do things. I think that needs to be looked at.
Bob, I've got about a minute. According to the latest figures, the Dicastery for Communications had a $52.5 million budget for 2021. Its expenses are greater than the combined expenses of 10 Vatican departments. Do you expect to see budget cuts or a shrinking of that dicastery?
Well, this might be the prelude to that happening. It is true that it's a heavy weight on the budget of the Vatican, but it could be a great resource. Radio continues to be, in other parts of the world, continues to be quite important. I looked at Osservatorio Romano today. I can't say that as a person who's intensely interested in the Catholic Church that I find very much there. That's of great news interest. But Father raises an interesting point because, as we know, we've been involved in many events over in Rome. Very often, even when you're there on the ground, you hear one thing from one part of the Vatican, another thing from the press office. There's very little coordination. It's not at the professional level that you would find at the White House or, other large professional outfits. So something has got to happen, and maybe if it takes some budget slashing to get down to the essential, maybe that would be actually a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, well, I think they have a double problem. One, it's an unruly bureaucracy with a lot of money and very little know-how. That's the real problem. You have people who really don't understand what the audience today wants, and they're not willing to serve that audience. They're serving their masters who are, writing the checks. That's not always a good balance, at least not from my perspective. Gents, we will leave it there. Commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray can always be found at thecatholicthing.org. Thank you both.